So let me ask you a question. Well, let's pray first. Jesus, come with us today as we study your word, as we open it up. May we hear from your heart to ours. In Jesus' name, amen. So we've been looking at Jesus spending time at that Sabbath lunch at the Pharisees' house. And we'll introduce it again here. Jesus went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, and they watched him closely. When you go into the house of a Pharisee and you're Jesus, you're walking into the presence of the enemy, right? The Pharisees were out not just to discredit and defame him, they were literally out to kill him. But Jesus still accepts the invitation even into the house of his enemies. Aren't you glad that he was still hanging out at your house when you weren't too interested in him? He's pretty hard to get rid of. They watched him closely. It's a setup. There's a certain man there who has dropsy, so they bring a sick man in deliberately on Sabbath. And Jesus sees the elephant in the room, as it were. Nobody's saying anything. They're just staring at him. And so he hits it head on. He asks the Pharisees and the lawyers, so it's a whole group of them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Is it allowable? The word doesn't have anything to do with the law. It has to do with, at least linguistically, it's not the word law. Is it the custom, or is it okay? Is it sanctioned? And they kept silent, didn't say a word. So he took the man, healed him, and let him go. And then he said, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that's fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Jesus used, I pointed out 3 different times, 3 different situations, a variety of this animal versus people in need parable. And of course, what Jesus is saying is, you guys treat animals better than you treat people. A distressed animal you'll help on Sabbath. A distressed person, you'll wait till sunset, and then you'll probably ignore them then as well. And they could not answer him regarding these things. Jesus has a way, have you noticed, of pointing things out such that we end up silent. we really can't outlogic him, can we? Now, we introduced this story, and then for 2 Sabbaths, we've talked about Sabbath keeping. And I've asked each time, can you talk about Sabbath keeping without being a legalist? Can you talk about how to spend that day and what God meant it for without turning into a Pharisee? And we've emphasized 2 or 3 things. First of all, that concept, is it lawful? Have you thought about running your marriage that way? Honey, is it lawful for me to do this? Am I allowed? That's really not the spirit of relationship, is it? Can I get away with this without you leaving me? Can I do that without you getting mad? That's just the wrong direction. And then we asked another question. What was the original purpose of Sabbath anyway? Sabbath is one of those things that predates sin. We haven't got much left that predates sin. We got gender, and that's being attacked. We've got marriage, and that's being attacked. We've got the family, and that's being attacked. We got the Sabbath, and it got attacked a long time ago. Satan wants to take out anything that comes from before sin because that's the best stuff. That's the stuff that really makes life work amazingly. But when you think about the Sabbath, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? That would have been an absolutely, not only a stupid question, but a question one would have even thought to ask before sin. There wasn't any good of that nature to be done, right? Because when the whole question, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, every situation I find it has to do doing something good to overturn and remedy a problem brought on by sin. It's not, is it okay to be nice on the Sabbath? Is it okay to heal a sick person? Is it okay to help a down and out person? Is it okay to do some work for the benefit of someone else, even though we're not supposed to work on the Sabbath? So the whole concept of that question, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, has to do with overcoming the problems that sin has caused. which wouldn't have been a question before the Sabbath began, or before sin came in. We looked at the verse in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, where it says God finished the creation in 6 days, and then on the seventh day he finished his work. It's the same word. And what did he do on the seventh day? He ceased from what he had been doing, and he blessed and he hallowed. And as I suggested, that's not nothing. You can't see blessed, you can't see hallowed, but that doesn't mean it's any less real than a rock or a tree. So God finished the creation on the seventh day by adding a spiritual dimension which he invites us to enter into. The Sabbath is not about doing good. The Sabbath is about hanging out with God in a perfect world. And even now the Sabbath is kind of about hanging out with God as if we're in a perfect world while we're in an imperfect world. Act like the concerns of survival and all the maintenance. Can you imagine living in a world without maintenance? Where nothing broke. You didn't have to change the oil on anything. You didn't have to rebuild anything. You didn't have to do the roof every 25 years. Things were living and alive and vibrant and self-maintaining. Wouldn't that be great? You know, when you're young, you want to get this, you want to get that, you want to get something else. And then you discovered you're completely swamped by trying to keep it from falling apart. And all of a sudden, as you get older, you start wanting to get rid of things because you're tired of fixing things. The less I have, the less I have to maintain. The Sabbath is a day to drop out and cop out and hang with Jesus as if there were no sin problem, no survival issues, no keeping up with the bills, none of that kind of stuff. You can act like you're already in heaven and kick back for a whole day of rest, rejuvenation, and relationship. Enter sin, and now you have broken things and hurting people. You know, I remember many, many, many years ago, about 60 years ago, I actually can remember back then, when the plumbing stopped up on Friday night at our house. And I remember my dad doing what he never did on Friday night, and that was working on the plumbing. And of course, what's our joke on that when the ox fell in the ditch, right? We shouldn't push our ox in the ditch, but sometimes the ox ends up in the ditch. And you have to do things you wouldn't normally do on Sabbath. And it may be okay to do them, but are you experiencing the best of Sabbath when you have to be distracted by some of the emergency junk of this life? Do you understand that? It's not what can I get away with, it's how much can I clear so I can spend the time with God and with my friends in Jesus and with my family in Jesus. So I challenge you a little bit with the concept that we need to be careful that we don't go out and fill our Sabbath up so much with doing good that we don't have any time for rest, rejuvenation, and hanging out with Jesus. Sometimes we literally fill our Sabbaths up with so much stuff that I don't think we really get to get back and experience Sabbath because we're doing all that good. But Sabbath isn't about doing, it's about being. And every once in a while it has to be interrupted with doing that needs to be done. Now, I don't want to belabor this topic too much, but I came across a couple things again this week that I came across them last week, but I didn't get to preach last Sabbath. We had a good time though, didn't we? Once when Jesus was questioned about the Sabbath, he made note of something. He says, have you not read in the law, speaking of the laws of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless. Now, you can look as hard as you want to, but that verse is not in the Pentateuch. There is no verse in the books of Moses or the Old Testament that says those words. And so if you look in your Bible, there'll be a cross-reference to some things in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, where you might say they'll point you to the fact that on the Sabbath there was a daily sacrifice. Well, now, a daily sacrifice, and I'm really glad we don't have to worship that way today. I think it made sense back then, and I know what it pointed forward to. But the daily sacrifice was literally butchering an animal. Something you wouldn't normally do on the Sabbath day. You'd leave that to another time, but because it was part of the worship event that pointed forward to the death of Messiah, the priests did things on the Sabbath that you wouldn't do in the marketplace that would be working. The best you can do is go back to examples of things the priests did from time to time in the worship events that in a secular setting would be considered breaking the Sabbath. The word for profane actually goes back to the Greek root from which we get the word basis, which seems to refer to the step. The priests step on the Sabbath and are blameless. And you know, we run into this. We have choir practice on Sabbath. Should we do all of our worship preparation off of Sabbath? We'll get the kids together on Friday night and run through the worship service, you know. I've heard churches argue about that. But it seems that my Sabbaths can be almost so busy that I've often said I worship on Sabbath, but I keep Mondays. And yet, I too need to be planning ahead so that even the work of preparing for worship leaves me time to enjoy family, friends, and God on the Sabbath. Does that make sense? It's balance. It's all about balance. John 7, verse 21. Jesus said to them, this is to the Pharisees again, I did one work and you all marvel. And by the way, he's referring here to the healing of the man by the pool of Bethesda, which had happened a year and a half prior. They're still talking about it. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it's from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken. And what does the law say? A baby boy is to be circumcised on the 8th day. And by the way they counted that would be exactly 1 week after birth, because day 1 was the day of the birth. So born on Sunday, circumcised on Sunday. Born on Wednesday, circumcised the next Wednesday. Born on Saturday. Like I said, you know, the doctor can't say, well, you just hold on to that baby till after sunset and then we'll deliver it. That doesn't work. If the baby's born on Sabbath, the circumcision went on Sabbath. So Moses said to circumcise on the 8th day, and that can be on the Sabbath, and you do it on the Sabbath, and you're angry at me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath. Do not judge according to appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. We all hate it when somebody thinks we have poor judgment, don't we? I think especially us men. When you women question our judgment, ooh, that's tough. I think it's interesting that in the name of Sabbath keeping, we start telling God what's okay to do on the Sabbath. You know, if God says to do something on the Sabbath, it's okay to do it on the Sabbath. In fact, if God says something to do at any time, just do it, right? Whatever he says, don't question, follow. Follow the Lamb wherever he goes. You know, you look at the nitpicky ways the Pharisees were keeping the Sabbath, you wonder why they didn't say, well, God couldn't have meant circumcise the child on the 8th day we would need to skip the Sabbath and have it on the 9th day but no, they followed the law there, and yet they pick at Jesus for healing a man. Now here's one more interesting one. The story of Jericho. Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. None went in and none went out. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hands, its king, the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all you men of war. You shall go around the city once. You shall do 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. But the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. Now, we don't know what day they started. But if they started on Monday, then the conquer came on Sunday, right? The 7th day that they marched around. And there was a Sabbath in there. It shall come to pass when you make a long blast of the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people will shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go every man straight before him. In other words, they'll just walk straight into the city, as if there were no walls. So it was, when Joshua had spoken to the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets. And Joshua had commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout or make any sound with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout, and then you shall, the word's missing, shout. All right? Don't know what happened there. Can you imagine the people inside Jericho? Well, this nation of hundreds of thousands of people walk silently all the way around the city. And the priests are blowing these ram's horns, and they're carrying this thing between the priests. But everybody's silent. So we had the ark of the Lord circle the city, going around it once, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did it 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they blew the trumpets, they shouted, the walls fell down, and the city fell. Amen? The great story of the fall of Jericho. I have heard one Adventist preacher that I'm well acquainted with who said they must have taken the Sabbath off because it would have been wrong to march around the city on the Sabbath. And I say, if God tells you to march around the city on the Sabbath, go march around the city. Does that make any sense? God made the Sabbath. He made it for us. He didn't make us for it. We need to let him define what he wants us to do, right? I guess they marched around the city on the Sabbath. Don't tell God how to keep the Sabbath. Don't start defining the Sabbath keeping to God. Don't start creating Sabbath laws for each other as if you are God. But let's let God tell us how to keep the Sabbath and gain the maximum benefits. It's his holy day. He made it. He defines it. He made it for us, for our benefit. It's a blessing to keep and observe. It's not a negative, onerous day. If your Sabbath keeping is duty, heavy drudgery, and negative experience, guess what? You're not keeping the Sabbath. If your Sabbath keeping is just doing whatever you want to do, guess what? You're still not keeping the Sabbath. If your Sabbath keeping is a delightful day with God, family, fellow believers, that leaves you blessed, refreshed, and energized, ready to face another week, walking even closer to Jesus, I think you've finally been truly keeping the Sabbath. Does that make sense? It's not about staring and saying, what can I do? What can I do? What's legal? What isn't legal? But it is hanging out with God and saying, what do you want me to do today? And if he says march, march. If he says sleep, sleep. If he says sit, sit. If he says sing, sing. I'd like to suggest you can't even enter into the idea of Sabbath keeping if you're not in a personal relationship with Jesus. Because Sabbath keeping is about hanging out with the Jesus you're having a personal relationship with. And if you don't have a personal relationship with someone, you can't spend time with them in that way, even if you're in their presence. If you quit doing everything else and you hang around somebody, but you're not in connection with them, you haven't been together. So it's all about relationship. And if Jesus says today we're going to march around Jericho, march around Jericho. I mean, I think we need to encourage each other. I think we need to study the Word together. I think we need to counsel with each other. But we need to stop making rules for each other. We need to stop picking at each other. We need to hang out, worship God. I think Jesus, if we are in a relationship with him, is fully capable of bringing us into the Sabbath with him. Does that make sense? So I'm going to ask Mike Sorovic to come up here for a minute. I took Mike out to breakfast, what, about 4 or 5 weeks ago?
Yep, it was
On the 8th of August. Was it August?
July.
July. I took him out to breakfast on the 8th of July because I had a concern. You know what that concern was? I wanted to talk to him a little bit about his Sabbath keeping. That's dangerous. Now, Mike's been trying to sell his house for months. How long?
November of last year.
Okay, 8, 9 months. And it's not selling. And you're building elsewhere, and the money isn't there, and it's tough. And Mike wasn't in church because he was showing his house. And I thought, you know what? I could get in trouble for this, but I want to challenge Mike to maybe consider just not worrying about selling his house on Sabbath and see what Jesus does. So what did he do?
So quickly, I'll give you
It'll start in a second.
Reader's Digest version. There are several testimonies within the testimonies that have happened during this whole process. It's been a year since we've been trying to sell this house, and like you mentioned, we were having a new place built up north, and this house was going to sell for that, was going to pay that one off. And I got retirement coming up. There's any number of things. I shut all my finances down that I could, bring extra money in to adjust for the additional monies that'll be cost for the expenses for the storage fees and the building process of the new home. So you can imagine the stress involved with trying to organize a household, money's coming in. So there's 2 little testimonies in here. One, I stopped tithing. I stopped tithing because
You didn't tell me that.
because the money was tight. Yeah, I'm like, I'm paying basically 2 mortgages. So it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks after I stopped tithing that God was really impressed upon me. That and the story of Solomon came to mind, where Solomon was punished for building his house before God's. Before finishing the temple, he built his house, and he's telling me that's where you're at right now. You're putting your house ahead of mine. So that was pretty crystal clear. So I started tithing again. It was probably about 2 months after that. We've had various showings on and off, and a lot of them were, as you know, when you have showings for your house, a lot of them are on the weekends because that's when people are off and that's when they want to look at your house. Saturday is a popular day. Well, we decided that we would continue to do that, and again, we were seeing nothing. And then, out of the blue, the pastor invites me to breakfast. I'm thinking, I'm in trouble for something. I'm like, what did I do? What does he want? What have I got myself into? And we half joked about that. I was texting my buddy, he's telling me, did you complain to the pastor about something? Because he wants to talk to me. This isn't good. So he challenges me that day to stop showing the house on the Sabbath. We did. On that day, we stopped. A month went by, and in that time, we may have had 1 showing that between then and there. I'm like, great. I said, where is this going? Last Sabbath was kind of the culmination for that. The wife and I were sitting over here, and I had a friend come up and ask me, who I hadn't spoken to in a while, Steve, and he just got to ask me about how the process is going, where I've been, and it's amazing how just my blood pressure started raising. I didn't want to even talk about it. It was that big of a deal in our house and our lives, and it had consumed so much of everything we were doing, our finances, our Sabbath, our relationship with Christ, that it was just, I wanted to leave. So the wife and I, of course, we left. We got home, my wife was in tears. She just wanted to know how much longer this was going to happen, what God's plans were. She wanted to stay for Sabbath class. It was just one of these things where I need a break. I need to step away from this. I don't want to keep talking about it because I don't know where God's going in this. That afternoon, I get a call from my realtor. I ignore it because I've already explained to her we've stopped Saturday showings. We're not doing it. She calls me again. I ignore it. Figured, leave a message. I'll get to it. Then she texts me. She goes, look, we have this couple that really, really wants to come to see your house. They're desperate to see your house. They just backed out of another house because they want your house. They have an elderly parent. They're moving in with them. And we have this little room up in front of our house that has its own bathroom and everything with it. And they say it's perfect for her. So I'm like, listen, we are not available. If they want to come in after sunset, or they want to come anytime Sunday morning, by all means, come over. I don't know what the rush is. Are they out of town? Are they flying out of town? What's the deal? But we're here after sunset. So the wife and I were praying on it, asking, God tests, we've been testing God this entire time. So now he's testing us, right? In that moment, I didn't sit there and answer that phone or pick it up or have a conversation because we've agreed we're keeping the Sabbath. So the wife and I, we prayed in that moment that, look, we're risking that they could walk away from this because they want to see the house now. Literally, the realtor was like 5 minutes away from our house, and we want to look at it. It's not happening. We're not going to do it until after sunset. And we prayed on it, like, God, if this is it, then this is it. If it's not, then it's not. But either way, he's testing us, and we are strong in that. And I was just finishing up a Bible lesson, and the wife was in the kitchen. She was listening to her music, and we stopped in that moment, and I was on the verge of tears, she was crying, and we were just praying to God in that moment that this is it. So anyhow, they accepted, and they came in after sunset to look at the house. So at the middle, 8 o'clock, they're there for almost an hour in our house. And that night they made us an offer. And we close on September 12th is our closing date. So again, it's just keeping the Sabbath, right? As soon as we stop that, even in a month, God's testing us. Like, look, I'm only giving you one showing. There was nothing. It dried up. We were thinking about renting the house out and thinking next steps and where this looks, because now we're going to have additional monies coming out, and we got to figure out how we're going to make up for the difference. The wife even picked up a job to assist with all of this. So this is the culmination at the end of August. And if anybody knows anything about the selling, it's usually spring and summer that people look at it. August ends and we haven't sold this house. We're pretty much looking for other options at that point, trusting in God that it'll happen, but it doesn't relieve the stress. But anyhow, I know I've taken longer than I probably should have, but there are a lot of other little testimonies that led up to this whole thing that guaranteed me that I knew God was listening and following us, and he heard us. He just wasn't answering the big questions that I had for him in that moment, which was very frustrating. But in the end, he certainly came through. And I think everything has to do with again, keeping the Sabbath and keeping God at the forefront of all your decisions and everything that you do in life, and that he will come through with you. The importance of tithing and the importance of keeping the Sabbath, I can't impress upon you more the importance of it. So there you have it.
Thank you. There are two areas where God says, test me. And he just mentioned them both. Isn't that right? On tithing, God says, test me, and I'll open the windows of heaven. He doesn't say, I'll give you $1 million job if you'll pay tithe. He says, with your minimum wage job, start tithing and watch me. You have to sink the ship. You have to risk. And the Sabbath isn't quite said that way. God doesn't say, test me when it comes to Sabbath, but it's really the same principle. If we're willing to lay down the pursuits of the here and now and the business and the survival and the getting stuff done and take the Sabbath time to hang out with God. And I know it can sound a little bit legalistic to say, no, I'm not going to show the house on Sabbath. I'm going to keep the Sabbath. That just has the wrong sound to it to me. On the other hand, I've run into it many times where somebody wanted to invade my day off with my wife, and I've had to say, no, that's not an emergency. We'll take care of it tomorrow. Today, I'm spending with my family. And if you do not protect relational time with each other here, it will all get taken away by busyness and bosses and all kinds of interruptions. So I don't believe it's legalistic to say, you know what, there's certain things I'm just going to set aside on the Sabbath. Even if it's the biggest day for showing my house, I'm going to trust that I can spend that day with God and He'll sell it another time. And of course, I have breakfast with, I'll just tell you, I really felt God impressed me. You need to challenge Michael on this. And, God, I'm hoping He'll come through, right? I give Mike that advice, and then his house never sells. We're in trouble. But I've never seen that happen, people. If we will set down the pursuits of the here and now and focus on the pursuits of eternity during the Sabbath hours, I absolutely believe, and I've never seen it fail, that God takes care of business here. We're further ahead with 6 days of business and 1 day off than we are with 7 days of business. The people running all 7 days end up behind us because God has a way of making 6 bigger than 7. Just as God has a way of making 90% bigger than 100% in tithing. You know, the real rubber meets the road on the Christian life has to do with when and how we trust God with the survival stuff of this world. Do we really believe He'll take care of us? And when we don't set things aside like for the Sabbath or return our tithes, what we're really saying is, nope, I don't really think God can handle this one. I gotta handle this one myself. And I'm excited your house sold. And enough said. Take your time with God every morning and then give Him a whole day on His holy Sabbath. He says the blessing will be tremendous. It's not about what can I get away with. It's how much can I clear the deck to spend time with God, my family, my church family, in worship, in spiritual focused pursuits, and maybe even in a little extra sleep. Rest. Let's pray. Jesus, thank You for calling us to live our lives differently than the rest of the world. And You tell us that living our lives Your way will be better. We'll be ahead, not behind. We'll be above, not below. And we have a hard time believing that. And so often it comes down to us feeling that You're calling us to restrict our activities on the Sabbath for some reason of holiness and religion. Would You please remind us that You're not calling us to restrict ourselves of anything. You're calling us to be free from all the stuff that sin has brought into our lives 1 day a week. And to be free to live like we're in Eden or we're in heaven. And may we have the faith to set down the stuff post-fall of sin. The buying, the selling, all the stuff we have to do now that never would have come in if sin hadn't come. So that we can actually experience a little slice of eternity every Sabbath because we've truly just given You that time, and we'll let You define how we use it. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.